Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Danny Thorniley, President of the CE Russia Business Group, and I'm very delighted today to be speaking with Robert Bednarski, who is the Vice President, Central Eastern Europe for Facebook. We're running a series of conversations with executives who we feel will have a lot of good information and insights and interesting things. I've had some preliminary talks with Robert, and it's been a pleasure having those. So I'm looking to today's conversation. So hello, Robert, again. Very nice to be here
Hello,
together.
Daniel.
And Robert, a few personal words. How did you get to be sitting in the chair today? And what's your background?
Thank you so much, Daniel. First of all, thank you so much for this opportunity, and thank you for just promoting me to the vice president, which I'm not yet, but I hope I will be after this discussion. So thank you so much. I'm indeed at Facebook, and I have a pleasure to lead our Central Eastern Europe team, which is based primarily in Warsaw. And I'm in this role for 6 years. Before I joined Facebook, I spent 15 years managing and developing in Poland one of the largest online business, which is called Poland and Onet. And I have actually had a privilege to work with various partners across the industry in media and technology, and that made me very passionate in the industry, and therefore having an opportunity to work at Facebook and get this regional footprint and role was really a great opportunity for me, and that's how I found myself at Facebook, and I'm very grateful to be here.
Well, we've gone through COVID 2020 this year, and who knows, next year we'll certainly have the after effects or actual effects. And we're seeing that in India tragically at the moment, and levels are still high in Western Europe and certainly in Austria, Central Europe, and so forth. But if I could first ask Robert, on a global level, we've seen the work from home big move. IT has been in massive demand, digitalization at the forefront, and Facebook is quite a well-known name. So what are the big global drivers that you and your colleagues are seeing? And then we'll move into the region.
So first of all, what pandemic brought is a huge change. I mean, change which is apparently touching almost each dimension of our lives. And this change which we talk about is can be only compared to the biggest kind of transitions and revolutions which we have seen in the past, which have been changing really people's lives. In this case, unfortunately, this has been very tragic to millions of people, and which is the most important. On the other hand, it brought massive change to the business, to people's behaviors. And one actually thing which is, I think, very special for this change is the role of technology. So if we look in the past into, let's say, last 100 or 150 years, the changes, the biggest sort of crises in the world, they usually actually have been resulting in limiting to huge extent the communication between people and almost stopping the business, whatsoever. This time, this was not the case. Of course, we have had gigantic disruption in the offline business, but thanks to technology and thanks to online, we observed only hugely increasing communication between people thanks to online tools, and that has also a huge impact of acceleration of already very strong trends of increasing of the meaning of online as, of course, as a major sort of central platform for people to do shopping. So what we may say is that the trends which we have observed in the past for last couple of years, which have been very dynamic trends of the growth of the e-commerce role of online in people's life dramatically accelerated over the last 1.5 years, to that extent that we can say that the leapfrog like 5 years in that journey. And of course that has a numerous consequences on large and small businesses all over the world.
In terms of Central Europe, we might come back to some of the global themes in a second as well. You know from your own conversations with so many of your clients and customers, Central Europe and Russia broadening it out. I've spoken with 300 executives in recent months, and 80% maybe, something like that, say that Central Europe is either their #1 business region or certainly in the top 2. And invariably better than Latin America, Africa, Middle East, and even parts of Asia. I'm not saying that to be pro-Central Europe, it's just an objective and business fact. I'm just wondering, the dynamics you talked about there, I imagine many of them are similar in Central Europe. So that's the first question. What are the differences about Central Europe? And you know the region very well. And what are the similarities? And then also for Facebook, what are the drivers? Are you seeing Central Europe and Russia performing pretty well comparatively compared with the other markets?
First of all, I think what's important to emphasize is that the change which we talk about in terms of the hugely increasing role of e-commerce as we speak over the last 1.5 years is a very pervasive global change. It's happening everywhere. So that's I think important to state and underline in the beginning. And then when we actually shift the gears to Central Eastern Europe, apparently we can say that this change is only even stronger here. I mean, so these trends which you just described, and also from what I hear, Danny, you confirm, is that these trends and acceleration is only even faster. And when we talk faster, we talk about all types of businesses, small and large businesses. And let's have a look in a second into these two distinctive groups, meaning small and large businesses. But it's also interesting to ask the question, I believe, why it is so. Why Central Eastern Europe we see these trends only faster. I think for a couple of reasons. We have been observing in Central Eastern Europe over the last couple of years that we have this tendency, the great tendency to often adapt faster the technologies, the new technologies, with the ability to take a bit more risk, to try new things, to explore these opportunities of technologies for the benefit of business, for the benefit of job creations, etc. Why it is so, I don't know, to be very honest, why we have such a great sort of behaviors in the society across millions of small businesses in the region. That may also be the result that we have often in our countries in Central Eastern Europe probably the first or the second generation of entrepreneurship after the big changes from last 30 years, so which probably makes people more willing to move faster, to take the advantage of the technology. So just to conclude, we see these trends rapid, really very rapid in Central Eastern Europe. We can say that if we look, for instance, at the e-commerce, the retail e-commerce, we see the largest ratios of growth across the globe. That's actually the external reports, which is great. Also, if we think about small businesses, I think that's incredible how small businesses take an advantage of technology. Apparently, more than 60% of all businesses, of all small businesses, they take an advantage, for instance, of Facebook and Instagram for the business, which is, of course, hugely important. And even more businesses, they admit that they take an advantage of the digital channels to drive their business. So considering that the small businesses, they account for more than 60% of all the GDPs, I mean, I think that's hugely important for all of us to know and admit. And with that, I think there's one more point. Just to understand what this technology, why this technology is helping so much. And there's one interesting fact about it. For instance, is of course the access, which is like the pervasive. I mean, everyone has an access these days to this technology, which was not the case in previous times. I call it like a democratization of marketing, from that perspective. But also like the things, the simple things like personalization of marketing, which was not possible back in time. And of course, if you're like large company, and you have large budgets, you could possibly afford for non-personalized ads, and has potentially less efficiency. But if you have a $200 in a pocket to market your business, you want to really reach your clients. And from that perspective, small businesses take huge advantage of what personalization of advertising brings. So, but that's an example which I think it's good to have in mind.
Yeah, super. Thanks. You're very right, of course. Some SMEs in Europe and in Central Europe play a very big role in GDP and employment, less so in Russia, and maybe we can talk about Russia later. But just staying with Central Europe, of course, as I say, the GDP numbers, the wage numbers, consumption, unemployment are all pretty good. My own assessment is I think we're going to have a good 2021 for business and the economies. I make a proviso, and I'd like your comment on it, Robert. Unfortunately, the virus did return, certainly in recent weeks and months, and I wonder how you see that as a lag for the year. I then think that the first half of 22 will probably be good, and we'll still have the flow through into that year. Then I wonder where we'll be for business in a way. So I'm asking you what the short term, the next 18 months for Central Europe is in your view for business and Facebook. And then the longer term, we know that the digital transformation is taking place, as you've said. Will it accelerate further, which I suppose is not the consensus, but will it, I don't think it's going to decelerate massively. So the question is, I'm sorry, it's a little rambling, what's the short-term outlook for the region? And then what do you think of the further out?
Okay, so first of all, obviously we don't have the glass ball, the magic glass ball to predict future. That would be beautiful, but there are certain things which we observe and, and which seems to create certain trends. And first of all, yes, I mean, we see, for instance, here in Poland, we are just having the third wave of COVID, and nobody knows how many waves we'll have more, and there will be more mutations, etc. So I personally believe that we have to get used to certain new standards of living and more cautious, being more cautious, in the way we simply live, and that these are certain, I think, new behaviors which will be rooted in the society. That's on one hand. On the other hand, I'm very, very encouraged with like very accelerating vaccination across the globe, which I think it's super important on the other hand. And if we leave that for the moment, because we don't know really how that will develop ultimately, and we focus more on people behaviors and on business as well, is that the trends which have accelerated in COVID, we see them to continue. So if you ask whether we see the slowdown in, I don't know, the small business behaviors or the large businesses, the way they started to change very fast or accelerated the changes during the pandemic, they don't stop. I mean, they continue. Apparently, there are different sort of phases of this, transformation, and we can definitely look into that from the perspective of defining couple groups of businesses. There are, of course, businesses which have been born, in digital. These businesses have been hugely benefiting of the pandemic because they only accelerated what they have been doing. So that's like one group, and there's a number of categories within that group. The second group of large businesses, there are traditional businesses, which were primarily founded and built their success for many years in offline, and now they're transitioning and accelerating in online. And then again within that group there probably would be coupled, but we see a massive acceleration in that sense, and that's something which is for me personally very fascinating, how this change and what we call digital transformation looks like and what sort of dimensions it has. And there would be definitely the third group, which is, of course, the huge number. And talking about Central Eastern Europe, we talk like 14, 16 million of small businesses, whereas most of these small businesses took already an advantage of online before pandemic.
Yeah.
And online, I would say, for many of these businesses become the premier central way of how they communicate with their clients, how they get new clients, how they do simply business, and what's actually is the main sort of engine for their kind of acceleration, how they can afford for more jobs, etc. So it looks actually like, there are a couple of groups of companies for which this kind of trends look slightly different, but the overall underlying trends, and I think the message is that what has started in COVID from the perspective of the acceleration of e-com is definitely not stopping. These trends will evolve, but why it is so, I think we should be looking at people's behavior to understand why it is so. At mass scale, globally, people have made new experiences in shopping online. Apparently, for instance, 8 out of 10 shoppers globally say that the internet makes easier to compare product by price. There is a huge number of people who have bought the first time various categories of products and services online. So they've made this mass sort of trial. What they have found is that shopping online is very convenient. They have found often that shopping online is cheaper. They also have found that shopping online is credible. So actually they get what they ordered. If they don't like it, they can return. These are like, that sounds very simple, but that's actually the core, how people build their confidence in terms of how they do shopping. On the other hand, there's something which I'm sure everybody have heard. There's a sort of shopping standard you've heard about is FOMO, which actually replaced currently with FOGO, which is fear of going out. So indeed, like the secure and safe environment for shopping is hugely important. So in mass scale, there are so many categories of our life and products in that sense, which is simply easier and better to buy online. And I can actually say it by myself, probably over this last year, I have bought as much online as I have probably did not bought in my entire life. But I may be probably, slightly biased, but I think I'm not the only one, considering what we see. So to conclude on this, let me do one more bridge to give you one more perspective. How the role of digital in that sense has dramatically changed over this 1.5 year. So, of course, e-commerce has been already very, very important and very big sort of, sales channel for so many companies globally, and for many of them was major and often only one. But online become a major platform for the discovery of new products. So the way I would advise to think about online these days as from the perspective of creation of new strategies, the way companies position online is to think about the online and think about Facebook and Instagram in that sense as really the discovery sort of platforms. And the way to understand this is that these are the platforms where apparently products looks for people rather than people looks for products. So in that sense, thanks to technology and thanks to
Mhm.
personalization, brands can access millions of people in the way they couldn't do it, in the past. And in that sense, at the mass scale, people simply come to online, come to Facebook, come to Instagram just to get, an experience with new products and often, discover them and do shopping at the same time. So there are certain emerging trends which we see at mass scale, which exactly COVID has dramatically accelerated.
Thanks a lot, Robert. Your point about the shopping and e-commerce, one of the regional executives for a famous cosmetic company said, Danny, e-commerce is never going to stop, and we're growing. A traditional business grows 6-7%, and e-commerce is growing 45-55%, that kind of thing. But the female executive did point out to me that Central Europeans and Russians like shopping. Now, all human beings like shopping. There's a social element to it, and you go for a drink with the boys and girls afterwards, whatever. So I think I agree with you. The experience will change, but it will not, eliminate, regular traditional shopping for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
if I may, Daniel, add to
please.
that because yeah, I think you're very right. I think it's important exactly to say is that what we're saying is by no means is that the online will replace offline. That's for sure not. And as I discussed with various company owners, CEOs about how they think about their strategy going forward, it's definitely not about like just shifting completely gears and strategy from offline to online, but it's more about understanding that making the digital the center of your kind of strategy for the future from the perspective of how we build an experience with our products with for our customers, how we communicate with our customers, where do they discover products, where they buy products, whereas actually they will buy products here and there, and this discover as well will happen and will continue happen as well in the shops. I think we need to acknowledge these two sort of dimensions of offline and online, and also acknowledge that the role of online dramatically changed. So for those large companies who were perceiving, online as a sort of additional channel of sales, call it, or marketing, I think actually it's definitely time to consider this as a center, for your strategy going forward,
Mhm.
both in terms of the customer relation, but also in terms of how you communicate with the brands, with the clients, where you look for new clients, how you build, your new sort of platforms, and how you actually build the future of growth.
Mhm. Thank you, Robert. I'll stay with this because, we're to use those words, omni-channel and hybrid route to market, etc., are cliches, but they're valid cliches, and that's what we're both talking about. For Facebook's experience over the last 18 months, you've answered this already in different ways, but your experience over the last 18 months in your customer relations, you mentioned at the start how it had changed and that dynamic, but are there more concrete examples of that, route to market, direct to customer, what people are asking from Facebook? We discussed a little bit, but I just wonder if there are specific cases. I'm thinking of Nike. They've told me regarding Russia, for example, and other markets, 95, 99% of their marketing now is digital. TV and newspapers seem, prehistoric almost in some ways. Now, admittedly, that is rather a well-known brand of apparel and, a certain customer base. But so my question is, those relations for your Facebook with your clientele, and then are there examples of your customers and clients changing, any case studies or people you can think of who've changed dramatically?
Yes, I mean there are plenty of these cases, and indeed, I also love the way Nike, thinks about their strategy, and you just refer to them. I don't have the direct relations. So it's hard to actually comment on details, but I really like the approach to digital. Having said that, and looking more into the details of examples from the region, one of the premier examples which I would love to share is the leading company which calls LPP. It's a retailer. It's a leader in fashion retailer in Poland. Present in multiple countries in Europe. Very large and successful company, present 20 years on the market, which built their success entirely on offline, with hundreds of shops in various countries. So really large company. And what they have done is that they took this change as an opportunity, with on one hand having huge challenges, of course, with all the lockdowns where all the offline channels were simply shut down. They took a massive change, an accelerated change in a couple of dimensions, starting from, of course, strengthening their teams and the competencies they had so far, would it be on the technology side and the e-commerce side, to that level that today we may say this is one of the strongest, definitely, companies, in the broad region from the perspective of technology and commerce competencies. On the other hand, the project they took right away with massive focus on the logistics, because we often talk e-commerce is growing, but how to actually fulfill the products from hundreds or thousands of shops where you don't necessarily have an integrated inventory, and access and all that stuff. So at mass scale, the company operating at billions of dollars of scale, it's not an easy task. Whereas actually they took it extremely seriously, this challenge, and they showed it's possible in only few quarters to integrate and accelerate massively, to be able to deliver products at scale, to online customers. But it's not only that. They also took a very brave approach in terms of how to embrace all the opportunities of new products. And I can talk, of course, from the perspective of the partnership we have with LPP. But having said that, this is one of these partners who is willing always to be first, to have the first mile advantage of testing new products. When we talk about testing, sometimes there are not only positive tests. It's sometimes things work, sometimes things does not work. But it's about being brave and move really fast and embrace the change. They did it. So what's the result? The result is that they don't grow 50%. They don't grow 100%. They grow at the scale of 270%. For instance, only in April 2020 versus last year, and there are a couple of hundreds of growth, for the following quarters, and we see further growth they experience now. And what I would love to close, this case is that leadership support. That would never ever happen without really a very bold, dedicated, and focused support and leadership from the C-level, the owners of the company, and the management board. It's not, something which has happened, let's say, in the e-com department. I mean, of course, people who deal directly have huge and central role in the success. But what I want to say is that sort of changes will never happen unless really the management, the owners of the company, take this really as their very premier, extreme important goal. And that was the case. So that's actually the example. We have more of them, but I think that's really a great one to share.
Marvelous, thanks, Robert. You've already touched on leadership, and I'm going to bring us back in a moment to human resources and talent in the region. But I really want to echo a couple of things that you've said for our listeners. You're absolutely right. You need the direction of the C-level for the strategy and the constant support. I think you also put your finger on it when you said making mistakes. This is something, there's going to be a lot of mistakes made, and learn from it, move on quickly. I think some of the very big companies globally may have struggled with that a little bit. That I think they're getting their heads around it now more, but it was the startups and the new firms that could do that more. You're absolutely right. Logistics, e-commerce is great, but the customer wants to receive it, even click and collect or whatever, but you've got to have the logistics right. And then going back to a point you made, the experience of e-commerce, I think it's absolutely right. And a senior IT executive was telling me the other day, maximum chances you've got is 2. If the customer's not happy with that experience, the thing to do is learn from the mistake, apologize to the customer immediately. It's our fault. Send back the product. We'll reimburse 100%, and we promise we won't do it again. And if you do it again, you've probably lost out as well. Just one personal example. I buy my books from many local bookshops in Austria, but I do use the famous book e-tailer that's well known around the world. And during the crisis, though, one of the big shops in Austria, I won't name them because I don't want to embarrass them, but one of the major book shops in Austria, I tried to buy from them, e-commerce digital, and they failed miserably. They didn't reply, they didn't stock the product, they said they did and everything. So it was back to the big famous names, as well as some physical things. So I'm just reiterating, Robert, what you're saying about that experience, which
Yes,
is crucial.
exactly. I think, I'm very glad that you brought the topic of experience, because this is a subject which is not, I think, as often talked as it should be. The experience in online is critical, and it works the way that, once the customer, have a great experience with one brand in terms of the shopping experience, this becomes for this customer a new standards right away. There's no sort of average standard. So it's actually just, if
Yeah,
we look for an experience, just we have to simply look for the very best experience and only match to that one, not the average. There's no average in online. There's the best and the rest.
yeah,
And why it's actually important. There are actually researches which clearly show that there is 50% of drop from the purchase path, along the purchase path, because of the poor experience, the poor convenience of shopping, which, if you translate to the global value of lost, shopping, that would probably, from what I remember, is like $4 to $6 trillion of lost kind of shopping
yeah.
opportunity because of experience. These are, of course, gigantic, numbers, but indeed, one of the best things we can do, from this optimization perspective, the convenience and experience, once again, convenience experience is critical. Last point to that one, just giving you an example of LPP once again. So they actually embraced the communication with customers. They shifted that very much to Messenger. So they use Messenger to the direct communication. Of course, they use bots, but also have their, sophisticated sort of funnel and how they take over, the conversations from bots, to people, etc. But also what they have done, they hired and they built up the separate company. With that scale, they can afford that, with a couple of hundreds of engineers who are actually working on improving all that, machine working further. So what I wanted to conclude, like this commitment, to the future and to the strategy centered around digital, while the major part of the business is still in offline, which is perfectly fine, and as you pointed out, it will be omni-channel. Yes, it's simply important to do it now. Because if one thinks about 3-5 years, we should rather think about what will happen year in two, because things extremely accelerate.
For sure, for sure. No, thanks, Robert. And also you mentioned the engineers there and the numbers of them. That leads me into a comment and the question. The preface is one of the IT companies told me recently, Danny, if 500,000 new software developers were plopped into Central Europe, tomorrow, they would be absorbed within a week. A little bit of an exaggeration by the executive, but he wanted to make that point. So there are two or three things, Robert. for 20 years or more, and recently, executives have been telling me the quality. I talked about business in Central Europe and Russia, but the quality of human resources talent, a cliche or a truism is they're good, very good comparatively. There are reasons historically for that, and they may have deteriorated a little bit, eroded in recent years or not. So we got the quality of the human resources. And I'm wondering from your perspective, the quality that you're seeing in the companies you work with, within your own company, just HR in general. And then the second question is the digital development of HR, because we've just said, it's going to be omni, but obviously e-commerce and digital and internal transformation, digital, is going to require a lot of software and engineers and specialists, maybe many of them working remotely from, Romania or Kenya or Dubai or Peru or God knows where. So my questions are, how do you and Facebook see the quality of people in our region? And then what are the dynamics you're seeing with getting digital people?
Yes, this is a very important subject, and I'm glad that you raised that. So I think it's good to start from acknowledging that we are privileged being in Central Eastern Europe from the perspective of one of the most tech penetrated regions, generally speaking. As far as I remember, we produce in Central Eastern Europe more than 1 million tech graduates every year. That's by far the record, if you consider any regions globally, any region, including China. So having said that, you've mentioned that it's like, it has some roots in our heritage. I will not get to that, but that's the fact. So that's actually, if we consider and come back to the discussion, why, it is like it is that we see certain trends even faster evolving in Central Eastern Europe. There are a couple of reasons for that, which we talked about, but the another one, which is super important, is exactly the tech penetration and the tech talent penetration. This region is simply strong in terms of the tech talent, which is great. But of course, to your point, yes, probably if we had 500,000 of engineers, they will find very easily and fast job because that's, the part of the industry which is continuously developing the fastest. There might be changing focuses within that industry.
Sure.
New topics, emerging, such as, of course, AI, and many more. But the tech remains the tech from the perspective of, the huge, very important trend. So that's one. And the second point, which you've made, is in regards of the digital competencies we see. So the digital is an emerging, it's like, of course, the digital competencies are present in the market for last, let's say, 20 years or so, or even more. But let's be clear, like the digital competencies of today have nothing to do, or almost nothing to do, with the one which were, let's say, useful 6 or 7 years ago. Like, okay, there's a slight part of that which is still useful, but what I mean is the technology changed so dramatically, giving so many new opportunities. And also what mobile brought is a completely new dimension. So the combination of mobile and technology rises the bar for competencies very fast. Yes,
Yeah.
I think we need to acknowledge that. But the other thing is good as well is that uh, there are so many good sources now for education, for online education. That, for instance, if we take Facebook and Facebook, we have opened up the full series of what we call the blueprint studies, which we, by the way, do ourselves. Our teams are doing that, and we actually open source that for all people. So it's exactly the same sources we train our teams, we open up for public, and they're online. So what I mean is actually in our hands, in companies' hands, to fulfill this gap as fast as possible for their businesses because the resources are there. So yes, this is how it looks like. So I think we're in considerably good situation because there is a gap. simply because the world is changing very fast. But on the other hand, if someone is really very keen to learn today, and I would say, has a marketing experience as general, one could get a huge progress in 3 months with good investment of time, considering how much resources are available online. Even like if we look Facebook and Instagram, what we offer. So this is I think in a pretty good shape. And also like the focus of managements, and the open roles. I talk with the companies, they have a focus on that. I mean, they hiring, they're looking for talent. So I
Yes.
probably should say that there's even bigger scarcity of the tech digital sort of skills versus pure tech skills, because of the change which is happening. And then let's shift for the moment to the remote and what actually
Yes,
pandemic
please.
brought in that sense. So the pandemic actually brought the huge sort of test at millions of people of scale, um, which proves that remote work can be effective. Can be effective and is effective for many industries. And I think Facebook can be an example of that. I mean, we're in the remote work for over a year already. We have not been in the office for vast majority of us, except of course our data center engineers, who of course have to be close to the data centers. But for majority of us, we are in the remote work, and it proves it works. Of course, we miss the personal connection. We're humans, yes. We miss and we look forward to have that. But from the job perspective, it works, and it works because again of the technology. So considering various tools which are now available, including of course our own messenger, which we use very much, or WhatsApp, this becomes simply possible. And in the rise as well of video, good cameras, all that stuff which apparently emerged so much over the last couple of years, this is a very new quality. So if we add to that with the area which calls the virtual reality, which is apparently one of the huge area for investments, where we put our bets and we invest so many of our engineers time, we should be experienced in the next couple of years, not 10 years. Look for a very short period of time, next few years, a very new quality of the interaction and experience with using, the virtual reality. So having said that, I'm personally, very convinced that the remote work is a proven concept after this year, in a sort of conclusion. The second is that there's a great future for remote work, considering also the virtual reality. And third, it's a great thing for talent, because that democratize again an access to roles. So from the employee perspective, these employers who actually open up for the remote work, they apparently build an advantage for themselves on the job market, on the hunt for talent, for the best talent, because they're not actually limited, for instance, I don't know, to one or the other city, or even one to another country. So it simply makes perfect sense from the talent perspective, from the positioning of the employer on the talent market. And of course, that brings so much more flexibilities, etc. I'm not saying that it's like black or white, from the perspective that it's only beautiful,
Yeah.
because there will be industries where the physical kind of presence will always be critical. But I think whenever we talk about marketing, whenever we talk about various types of services or technology, this is something we should be considering. And I believe, the CEOs shall be very seriously considering this, also from the cost perspective. That may make so much sense.
Indeed. Thanks, Robert. Just some closing points, and then I'll give you time for any end remarks as well. The premium we're seeing for digital skilled people, well, it goes from about 10, 15 salary premium. It ranges from conversations I've had 10 to 15% to 30 to 50%, to 50% plus. Depends on the quality of that talent, and it depends on, you know, how focused you are on that strategy and how much you really need those people as well. One of the things I'm putting in my report that we're going to produce for you next week on HR and talent and everything is, do you know where your staff are sitting, and do you care? And, you know, I think maybe technically, legally, you probably need to know where they are. If they say they're in Warsaw and they're in, you know, Honolulu, I don't know if that has any legal or tax ramifications or whatever. But I think generally, as you were implying, if they do their job and they're productive and competent and meet your requirements, you know, on one level, you don't care. People are working and it functions, and you make sure that the HR department is doing its job. So I think that remote, yeah, this is the globalization of the white collar work as well. Just, I think for our region, it's makes one smile. I think, as you said, there's a big demand for talent overall, full stop, because business is not bad. Central Europe and Russia, business, it was not bad last year, better than expected. This year and next year will be good. People are looking for talent. Voluntary turnover is down everywhere, of course, but people are leaving for jobs and being poached and so forth. And the two areas where I'm seeing really big demand is for skilled digital people. And you may or may not know, Robert, the other dynamic is blue collar construction workers. Because in Russia, you've had 6 or 7 million migrants who left and are not yet fully coming back. In Poland, as an example, you've got maybe 500,000 or 750,000 Ukrainians who left and aren't really yet coming back. So certainly the companies we're working with are saying, you know, blue collar workers, salaries rising 8, 10, 15, 20%, and you cannot get them. So I think it's curious, you know, the bifurcation of the market, really skilled software developers, brainy guys and girls, and then construction workers with pickaxes and spades. So that's part of the labor market, not all of it, but good.
Yes, yes, that's very interesting what you say, and definitely, you know, when you mentioned the remote and you know, you ask whether we know where people are, etc. First of all, I think similarly, like to many companies, we're at the very beginning of the journey. I mean, this remote sort of frameworks will be evolving, and we'll learn a lot, and we're learning. So we're in the very beginning. It's, you know, when you ask about do we know and do we care where people are? Yes, we do care very much where they are, and for the
I
very, very
understand.
simple reason is that, you know, as an employer we feel responsibility, you know, for
Of course.
our people. From that perspective, it's really important whether we're in a position to provide them, you know, with the medical support where they are, for instance, with the proper security and all that stuff, you know, with the benefits, etc. So yes, we do care very much, and this of course has number of, let's say, you know, that brings number of important elements, you know, which have to be very well taught and organized, you know, because simply if there's one company which has, for instance, a team in one country, and out of the sudden this company decided to open up for 40 countries, you know, and have talent from 40 countries, so this company ultimately have to have a legal tax framework for 40 companies, 40 countries.
Hmm.
Yes, instead of one. If one company wants to have, for instance, you know, people being, you know, in 40 countries. So there are a number of things which have to be considered, and we're considering many of them. But as mentioned, with only on the very beginning, we see loads of opportunities in that sense, and we definitely, you know, as well will be embracing them. But yes, there's definitely more to discover in front of us.
Thanks, Robert. On that point, I just echo yesterday, one of our pharmaceutical clients was saying, Danny, we've got a plan for HR, for salaries, for how many people will be in the office, out of the office, and the plan lasts for 6 months, and then we'll see what happens. because, you know, reality will arrive and
Exactly.
we'll have to adapt it. No, thanks for following up on the point. Now, this point about, you know, where are they in the UK? I just like this picture of, you know, some of your staff, this is a joke, some of your staff are saying, you know, I'm sitting in the industrial suburb of Warsaw, when in fact they're on the Costa Brava with a Campari. I just like that picture, but yeah, they need to be insured and have
Yes.
all the legal aspects of it, I'm aware. No, great, Robert. We're just looking at time. We've gone over, which is great, and it's been very enjoyable. Robert, any closeout things we've missed or you'd like to reinforce?
I think we've touched a number of subjects, and considering, you know, the depth of the change which we all experience is definitely more, you know, to discuss. So if there will be, you know, any subjects which might be of more interest, we can go deeper, you know, in the future, or maybe next talks, which would be great pleasure. One thing which I apparently would like to you know, to leave you with is that, to the maximum possible extent, I would encourage all business owners to consider this change as an opportunity rather than the threat. That would be like the main thing I would love to leave, you know, the CEOs or whoever will listen us, because yes, there is always something to lose, especially when we talk about large businesses. You know, there are always trade-offs, and this decision does not go often without the trade-offs. But, you know, the trends which we see in respect to online as such, and the huge acceleration of e-com, supported with very deep changes in people's behaviors, they're here to stay. They're here to stay, and we should not consider them as a danger, but really as an opportunity. And there are so many great examples of companies who take that as an opportunity and move really fast. There are still many companies who think about it and they wait. And as with all change, there will be the ones who will win big time, and there will be many of the companies which will simply lose their share in the market. So I want all of you simply to be the ones who win this change, and definitely if you look for some partners, you know, to support you on that, we're very much willing to support you on that and partner and support you, you know, simply on creating this bright future in online and support you on digital transformation.
Thank you very much, Robert. And of course, partnerships, the key to success. And Central Europe and Russia is a great place to develop long-termism and long-term partnerships. Also, Robert, we will take you up on your kind invitation for business conversation number 2. Thank you to you, Robert.
Thank
Very
you so
much
much,
indeed.
Daniel.